He thought I'd beg him to stay after the breakup, but I had quietly packed my bags and left, even before he realized I was gone. Funny how people believe you'll keep playing the same part in their story forever. I used to think that way myself, clinging to a man who saw me as little more than a doormat. But when the final argument came, I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I simply walked out the door, suitcase in hand, leaving behind the life I once believed was my only option. You might wonder how it all started, how I could ever devote my heart to someone who felt so certain I'd crawl back. Well, to understand why I left so abruptly, I need to take you back to a time when I still believed in us. When I was young, hopeful, and blinded by my own desperation to keep our relationship alive. My name is Jody. I grew up in a small, sleepy town with little more than a main street, a few modest shops, and the same families living there for generations. My parents ran a local hardware store, and from the time I could form sentences, they put me behind the old wooden counter to greet customers with a polite, "Welcome. How can I help you?" My mother would glance over with pride while my father gave me a nod of approval. We didn't have much money, but we had consistency. I guess that's what shaped me. The belief that a quiet, steady life with someone you love is more precious than any dream of traveling the world or chasing career ambitions. It was in high school that I first noticed Damon. He was tall, a bit on the lanky side back then, and radiated this intense energy that made him look like he was always about to run off in search of bigger things. Everyone said he was destined to leave our town, make his mark somewhere, and never look back. He had this restless spirit, one I longed to share in because deep down I was just a small town girl craving something more. Damon was my chance, my hope. We started dating in our senior year. He'd drive me around the winding back roads at night in his old sedan, the smell of gasoline and vinyl seats filling the cabin. That was the first time I glimpsed his temper. The car would sputter, and he'd slam a fist on the steering wheel, cursing under his breath about needing to escape this wretched little town. But then he'd turn to me, resting his hand on mine, promising that as soon as we graduated, we'd pack up and move somewhere bigger. Maybe a city with tall skyscrapers and bright lights. He swore I wouldn't be working the hardware store forever. I used to think his anger was just frustration with small-town life. I told myself it meant he was ambitious, that it was a good sign he had big dreams. I didn't understand how that fierce temper could one day be turned on me. We finished high school. He convinced me to enroll in a community college just outside our county so we could stay close to each other. He found a job at a car dealership, a step toward big city hustling, or so he claimed. I followed his lead. That first year out of high school was magical, in a sense. We moved into a crummy little apartment with threadbare carpet and a leaky faucet in the kitchen. We spent late nights eating instant noodles and whispering about how we'd run off to some faraway city the moment we saved enough money. The living room had these tall windows that overlooked a parking lot full of cars more dented and rusted than our own, but I still loved it. It felt like we had each other, so we must have had everything. Damon, on the other hand, grew frustrated again. He'd come home, drop onto the couch, and say, "We've got to get out of here, Jody. I hate this place." Each time, I'd soothe him, massaging his shoulders, telling him we'd find something better soon. I was so sure our love could weather anything. A year passed. He jumped from one sales job to the next, always talking about how management didn't respect him or coworkers were incompetent or the pay was lousy. Each time he quit, we had to scramble to pay rent. More than once, we fell behind, and my parents helped us out with a few $100s. Damon hated taking money from them. He'd rage about it for hours. Then I'd calm him down and assure him we'd pay them back. I kept thinking, he's just stressed. He wants more than this rundown apartment for me. How could I not love him for that? Then came his big break, or so we thought at the time. A friend offered him a position in a slightly bigger city about an hour's drive away. Office job, real potential for career growth. That day, Damon was so thrilled he actually broke into tears, hugging me and promising, "I'll make everything right. One day you'll have the life you deserve." We packed up our few belongings and moved to an even tinier, cheaper place in the city's outskirts. This time, there was no direct line of credit with my parents, so we leaned on Damon's friend for a deposit. I prayed for it to work out because we were burning through our savings. It worked fine at first. For about 2 months, he'd come home glowing, talk about the deals he'd closed, the commissions he'd earned. We started to stash away little bits of money, dreaming again about traveling overseas or moving into a better neighborhood. But before the third month ended, I noticed Damon's temper flaring more frequently. He'd come home sulking, claiming office politics were screwing him over. He felt undervalued, certain he deserved bigger deals and bigger payouts. Our arguments escalated. If I tried to reason with him, he'd snap, "You've never had ambition, Jody, you don't get it." Sometimes I'd quietly nod and relent because I didn't want to fight, but other times the sharpness of his words stung my pride and I'd push back. Then the shouting began. One night, a neighbor banged on our wall, telling us to keep it down. Damon nearly broke the lamp in a fit of rage. Whenever he ran out of steam and sank onto the couch with his head in his hands, I'd kneel beside him, stroking his hair, telling him how I believed in him. He'd look up, eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, baby, I'm just stressed. You're the only good thing in my life right now." It melted my heart. I'd cling to that apology, to that small moment of tenderness as proof we could keep going. But cracks kept forming. Damon left the city job to go freelance. It meant no steady paycheck, no consistent schedule. Sometimes we could scrape by, other times we had to ask for help from friends. My own plans, finishing my degree, trying to land stable employment, took a back seat. He convinced me that once he got big contracts, we'd be set, so it was best if I stayed at home and took care of things. "It's only temporary," he swore. You might guess where this is leading. More dependency on him, more volatility when money was tight. Eventually, the tension got so high that he brought up a breakup, just in a casual, threatening way, like, "If you can't handle a man with real ambition, maybe you'd be happier going back to your parents." The first time he said it, I felt as though he'd kicked me in the chest. The second time, I was prepared with tears. By the sixth time, I had gotten used to it. It became Damon's signature tactic whenever things didn't go his way. Threaten me with a breakup. Then I'd come running, apologizing for questioning him, desperate to prove my loyalty. That cycle went on for years, not weeks, not months. Years. Every time we clashed, he'd say, "We're done, don't contact me," and I'd scramble to fix it. I'd wait a day or two, maybe three, then call him or show up at his new place if he'd stormed out. He half laugh, half grumble, "Knew you'd come back because you can't survive on your own, can you?" And shamefully, I believed him. My self-esteem was battered. I believed I needed him, needed his weird blend of anger and reassurance, because it was all I knew. It was like an addiction to heartbreak and fleeting reconciliation. During one of our off-again phases, I found a job as a receptionist at an insurance firm. The pay was modest, the environment stable, and I loved it more than I expected. The neatness of daily tasks, the friendly coworkers, the promise that if I worked diligently, I could move up. It felt so different from the chaos Damon brought. He hated that job, said it drained my energy, and gave me illusions of playing it safe. He wanted a partner who'd risk everything, follow him anywhere. That conflict set off our biggest argument yet. He showed up at my workplace after hours, packing in the parking lot and demanding I talk to him. My coworker Stella overheard him yelling, "You're not the Jody I fell in love with, you've lost your spark." I stared at him in disbelief. The tears brimmed in my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of Stella. I asked him to leave. He refused, so security ended up escorting him out. That was the night he officially broke up with me for the last time, or so he said. He stormed off, and I fully expected I'd be the one crawling after him the next day, like always. But guess what? I was exhausted. My heart felt weighed down, not by longing but by sheer fatigue. After all those cycles of reconciling and breaking up, I just wanted quiet. I remember opening my apartment door and seeing the space we once shared. His leftover clothes in the drawer, the photos of us on vacation pinned to the fridge, evidence of a life built on shaky foundations. For 3 days, I went about my job and told myself, "Just wait and you'll give in, you always do." It was a strange, robotic feeling. I expected to crumble any minute, but that phone call never happened, at least not from my end. Instead, Damon called me first. Day 5, my cell buzzed. "Why haven't you apologized yet?" he demanded, voice simmering with annoyance. "Are you really going to lose me over a silly job?" For the first time, I wasn't trembling or stuttering. I heard myself say, "I'm not sure I need to apologize." Silence on the other end. Then he let out a laugh that sounded forced, as if to say, "That's adorable." He barked, "Fine, let's see how long you last," and hung up. The next morning, I got a text from a mutual friend, Casey, saying, "Heads up, Damon's telling everyone he's waiting for your call. He even said he might propose soon just to show you who's in charge," gloating that you're going to beg him back like always. Instead of feeling sad or outraged, I felt relieved. Because that's when it really sank in. He believed I couldn't leave. He thought I'd beg. The air left my lungs and an odd calmness took over. A rational voice in my head said, "He'll never change. Either you stay in this cycle or you leave now." I made my choice. I put in a transfer request at my job. There was an opening in a branch 2 hours away in a larger city with better career prospects. I'd be closer to Stella, who had decided to move there to be with her fiancé. Within a week, it was approved. I began boxing up my apartment. On moving day, 2 male coworkers helped me load everything into a rental van. I left behind only worthless items Damon had once insisted we keep: threadbare pillows, chipped plates, the couch with a giant coffee stain we could never wash out. It was as if I peeled away every memory of him. The last bag I slung over my shoulder contained those old photos from the fridge. I looked at them for a moment, Damon and me arms around each other at a carnival, big smiles plastered on. I couldn't remember the last time I felt that kind of hope. Without hesitation, I tore them up and tossed them in the trash. My phone rang, ironically, at that exact moment. It was Damon. I didn't pick up. By the time he tried again that evening, I was already driving out of town. The sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky soft pink. Each mile I put behind me felt like shedding a layer of fear. He left a voicemail. "Jody, why aren't you picking up? You always come back. Enough with this pride thing. It's not cute." His voice had turned mocking. "You're not strong enough to be on your own. Stop pretending you can just walk away from everything we built." I let that voicemail echo once through the speaker. Then I deleted it. Because that was the moment I realized he needed me more than I needed him. His twisted sense of power came from believing he could break me just so he could be the one to pick up the pieces. The next few weeks in my new city were hectic. My new branch required a lot of overtime, training, and shadowing. I hardly had a spare minute to mourn the relationship. Even if heartbreak lurked in the corners of my mind, I was too occupied to indulge it. I'd arrive at my small but clean studio apartment, heat up some leftovers, and fall asleep in a single breath. On the third week, my phone started blowing up again. Unknown number. I had blocked Damon's usual phone, but apparently he'd found another line or borrowed a friend's device. I never answered. In the days that followed, he tried everything, sending messages from random social media accounts, emailing me from new addresses, contacting my old neighbors. The gist was always the same. "Jody, come back. You're being unreasonable. We should talk this out like adults." But it was too late for talk. There was nothing left to say. I discovered a sense of peace and possibility in that new city. My coworkers invited me out for Friday drinks, and I felt the sweet release of laughter that wasn't haunted by Damon's presence. They teased me about my tiny accent, as though I were from some distant land. On weekends, I explored museums I never had the chance to see before, and best of all, no one knew Damon. I was just Jody. Not the girl who always ran back to her difficult boyfriend, but a woman forging a life on her own terms. Of course, Damon managed to find my new workplace eventually. He showed up one afternoon as I was leaving, wearing that old smug grin. "Thought you could hide," he said, blocking my path. My heart thudded, not from longing, but from residual fear. For a second, I felt like that timid version of me again, guilt-ridden, always ready to appease him. But I took a breath and squared my shoulders. "I didn't hide, Damon. I moved on. There's a difference." He snorted. "That's hilarious. You think you can live without me." I just stared at him. "Look around," I said quietly. "I already am." For the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes, but he covered it quickly with anger. "Fine, Jody," he barked. "Don't come crying to me when you realize you can't handle the rent or you lose your job. Don't you dare ask me for help." Then, ironically enough, he tried to follow me to the train station, peppering me with questions. "Where are you staying? Who's paying for it? Are you dating anyone else?" That night, I filed for a restraining order when he refused to leave me alone in peace. Time was the greatest healer. By the second month in my new city, I felt the throb of heartbreak recede, replaced by a budding confidence I hadn't realized I possessed. I earned a small promotion, nothing massive, just a sign that the higher-ups trusted me to handle more complex tasks. With a more stable income, I started thinking of taking up new hobbies, maybe a dance class or cooking workshop. That's the remarkable thing. Once you step off the carousel of heartbreak, you realize how much life can hold. The hours I used to waste trembling over Damon's next blow up or waiting for him to call me. Now I spent them reading, trying out new recipes, or venturing to the local library. It felt like every day I was discovering a tiny spark of who I might have been all along if I hadn't chained my self-worth to Damon's approval. I did wonder if he'd find a new girlfriend, if some other girl would get ensnared in that cycle. A part of me worried for whoever she might be, but I let that thought go because it wasn't my responsibility to fix or warn anyone else. Damon was his own problem now, and me, I was done. Then one crisp fall evening, I was grabbing coffee at a place near my office when a friendly voice said, "Hey, Jody, right? We met at last Friday's team dinner." It was Ryan, the branch's IT specialist, a sweet guy with an open expression and an eagerness in his voice that didn't irritate me. He asked if I'd like to join him at a table, so we sat, sipped our coffees, and chatted about the city, weird workplace stories, our favorite foods. A comfortable warmth crept into my chest, an unfamiliar sense of ease around a man that wasn't tangled in anxiety. It made me smile. Over time, we became good friends. He admired how I'd relocated on my own, leaving behind a messy situation. I never dove into the details, just said I got out of an unhealthy relationship. Ryan never pried. He respected my boundaries and talked about the web design side of the company. Some days, we'd swap random jokes. Others, we'd discuss personal ambitions. The more we talked, the more I realized how drastically different he was from Damon. Calm, secure, no outbursts, no manipulative words. It was refreshing. One night after an office birthday party, he walked me home. As we approached my building's entrance, he hesitated. "Jody, would it be okay if I took you out sometime? Just to dinner?" His eyes flickered with a hint of nervousness. A gentle invitation, not a demand. I froze up, uncertain if I was ready to date again. Memories of Damon's cyclical cruelty flashed through my mind. I had to tell Ryan about the restraining order, the drama, the scars Damon left. Wasn't that too heavy for a casual invitation? But Ryan didn't flinch when I gave him a glimpse into my past. He just listened quietly and said, "I understand it's not easy. We can go slow, or just be friends if that's what you prefer." His kindness was disarming. Part of me wanted to run, but an even bigger part whispered that not every man is Damon. Caution was healthy, but I couldn't condemn myself to a lifetime of loneliness because of old wounds. So I said yes. Yes, I'd like dinner. In the weeks that followed, Damon's presence dwindled to nothing. He must have realized I wasn't budging, that intimidation wouldn't work. A mutual friend told me that he'd started spouting conspiracies about me having a secret lover the whole time. Another friend told me he claimed I owed him money for emotional damages. It was laughable. And as soon as I heard the rumors, I knew. He was just flailing, trying to preserve his pride by framing me as the one who walked away for petty reasons. Let him talk. Everyone who mattered knew the truth. Ryan and I developed a beautiful connection, slow and careful, guided by mutual respect. He never raised his voice. If we disagreed, we talked it out. I had no idea how healing it could be, sharing a meal and discussing the day's frustrations without fear of an outburst or silent treatment. But healing is never perfectly linear. One day, I received a letter from Damon. Yes, an old-fashioned paper letter delivered to my new address. He must have found it from some contact. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with these words. "You really did it, Jody. You left. Now I'm the fool who believed you'd crawl back. I'm still angry, but maybe there's a part of me that's proud. Or is it just regret? Anyway, I'm sorry if that means anything." I stared at that letter for a long time. Anger, pity, relief, they tangled up inside me. I felt a sharp pang in my chest for the lost years. I thought of all the times we might have grown together if he had just sought help, if he had realized how destructive his behavior was. But I also knew none of that was my responsibility anymore. So I folded the paper, tucked it in a drawer, and never responded. Months passed, work improved. I got a more permanent position with better pay, moved into a slightly larger apartment, and started thinking about how I wanted to shape my future. Ryan helped me decorate one weekend, lugging boxes up the stairs, joking about college dorm vibes. We laughed, we teased, we ordered pizza. So simple, so ordinary, so peaceful. I realized I never had that with Damon, an ordinary day that just felt good. With him, every day was either exhilarating or miserable, a carnival ride that never stopped spinning. Eventually, I decided to visit my parents in the old town. I hadn't seen them in months. The place looked the same: dusty roads, the weathered facade of the hardware store. My mother ran into me with tears in her eyes, apologizing for not visiting sooner. My father gave me a gruff pat on the back, eyes shining with relief, and said, "You look happier." That evening, sitting on the porch swing I used to love as a kid, I gazed at the sunset. The last time I'd done that, I was a scared teenager with big dreams that revolved around Damon. Now, I was here on my own terms. For a moment, I wondered if Damon had also come back to this town, but I guessed probably not. He'd never liked it. Besides, if he was truly changing, he'd need to find that path alone. I stayed with my parents for a week, helping around the store, reconnecting with neighbors who remembered me. Almost everyone asked, "Where's Damon?" Or, "Aren't you two still together?" I offered a polite smile and a short explanation. Some nodded sympathetically, others gave me that wide-eyed pity. But none of it mattered. I was content. On my last night there, a quiet hush fell over the little house. My mother, never shy with her opinions, finally asked, "Are you sure about your decision? He was part of your life for so long." I nodded, giving her a tired smile. "Mom, I'm absolutely sure. I've never been so sure about anything. And don't worry, I'm not alone. My life is moving forward. I have new friends, a new place, and I'm okay." She patted my hand and said, "That's enough for me. I just want you safe and happy." Back in the city, the days started to blend into a routine. Morning coffee, chatting with Ryan about some IT glitch or silly office drama, returning to my desk, working diligently, scheduling nights out for dinner with friends, sometimes even letting Ryan pick me up from my apartment. I built a life that felt stable and in its own gentle way fulfilling. Did I still have moments of fear or flashbacks to Damon's harsh words? Sure, occasionally. Healing is a process. But I learned that each day I stayed away from that toxic cycle, I grew stronger. One Saturday, I was rummaging through old files, looking for an insurance document, when I stumbled across Damon's letter again. For the first time, I really read it all the way through, top to bottom, not just the single line. He'd included more on the back. "I got your new address from Casey. Don't blame her, she's just worried about you. Listen, I don't expect you to come back. I'm not writing to yank you back. I just wanted you to know I never believed you'd truly leave. Maybe I was too arrogant, or maybe I relied on your love too much. I guess I'll leave you alone now. Take care, Jody." A tear slid down my cheek, not because I wanted to return to him, but because it felt like closure. A final acknowledgement that yes, we'd parted ways for good. I stuck the letter in a box labeled Old Memories, taped it shut, and slid it into the closet. No more rummaging through that unless I felt prepared. Time carried on. My relationship with Ryan grew into something gentle, supportive, not the scorching fervor I once felt with Damon, but it was real and healthy. We had our first big disagreement over something silly. I think it was about budgeting or planning a trip, and I braced for an explosion. It never came. We talked, we compromised. The sky didn't fall. One evening, he brought me to a new, upscale restaurant. Over candlelight and soft music, I admired how far I'd come. From that shaky, codependent girl to a woman who could choose whether she wanted to be with someone. Damon's ghost no longer loomed over my head. I wasn't completely free of the scars, but the scars no longer controlled me. That night, as we walked along the street, Ryan slipped his hand into mine. "I'm proud of you," he said suddenly. "I know you don't want me making a big deal of it, but you fought through a lot. You're strong, Jody." In the past, I might have waved it off or insisted I wasn't, but I smiled and said, "Thank you, I'm proud of me too." You see, Damon thought I'd beg him after the breakup. He never imagined I'd just pack my bags and leave. But people sometimes underestimate the quiet ones, the ones they've manipulated for too long. When we break for good. I'm sharing this not just to relive the journey, but to offer you a piece of my heart. Sometimes the hardest part isn't leaving. It's believing you can survive after you do. And let me tell you, you can. You might feel lost at first. You might doubt every step, but you deserve more than a cycle of pain. You deserve a chance to carve out your own happiness. That's how my story ends, or begins, really. Freed from an endless loop of chaos, anchored now by hope in a different life. Thank you for staying with me and hearing this tale. If you found any piece of yourself in these words, please know you're not alone. I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to break away, to choose yourself, and to discover a future where you're not begging for love. You're receiving it freely and giving it back just as wholeheartedly. Thank you so much for listening. If this resonated with you, please click that like button, share your own thoughts in the comments, and consider subscribing so we can stay connected. What would you do if someone kept threatening to leave, expecting you to beg them back? Let me know below. Until next time, take care of yourself and never forget. Sometimes packing your bags and walking out the door is the first step to reclaiming your life.